Hello and welcome. This panel is called Conversational AI, Reliable Intelligence, Verification, and Data Accuracy. We're going to be talking about the actual use of AI in enterprise and the risks associated with uh, basically with hallucinations and confabulations and so forth. And we've got people from a number of different jurisdictions to be able to talk about it. I'm your moderator. My name is Jason Henderson. I am a senior attorney at JWL International, which is a law firm. I founded the IP and media practice, and so I focus mostly on distribution agreements and varieties of things that people who are distributing media have to worry about. And AI hallucination is becoming a concern for us every day in terms of risk, and so I'll try and scatter some thoughts into that. But I'm mainly here to introduce you to our wonderful panel of guests. They are, and I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, but they are Greg Young, VP Cybersecurity, Trend Micro; Tyler Bell, SVP Product, AI Video Sports at Gracenote and Nielsen; and Ben Holland, who is a media tech consultant with a deep background in deployments at a variety of different companies, including Adobe, Cisco, and the Trade Desk. So I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves, going in the order that I see you on my screen. Greg, tell me a little bit about your practice.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Uh, Greg Young, VP of Cybersecurity and Corp Dev with Trend Micro and Trend AI. 4 decades in cybersecurity, including military, government, uh, lots in the private sector. I was an analyst at Gartner, and I've been with Trend Micro now about 8 years. But my most important credential is actually having been an extra in 2 episodes of Airwolf. Gives me total credentials to participate
Really?
in digital
That is so
holocaust.
cool.
Yes, and I have been killed by the helicopter, so everything will be a helicopter analogy today. So,
Oh, please. Well, and in fact, by the way, and I'm going to ask you guys this as well. If you have any story just to key up, like what this topic today makes you think of, like some story from the trenches, briefly, go ahead and share it with us. And that would be starting with you, Greg, in fact, if you have one. If you want to save it, that's fine.
oh no, data accuracy and around AI and the like. This this is something that I think we've seen before. But my story from the trenches is certainly recently, just been so frustrated in wrestling with some of the models to get out accurate information,
Hmm.
very specifically things I know to be true, firsthand experiences, and they're not coming. It just can't wrestle them into it, including translating documents,
Hmm.
the simple things like this, and you know it to be true, and you start to doubt yourself. So I was trying to translate the document from Japanese just last week, and I knew the contents, and it lies. So,
Wow. Wow. Okay. Thank you very much. Ben, what about yourself? Tell us about yourself.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Holland. I've been in the video ecosystem and content space for 25 years, witnessing and participating in major disruptions, including the introduction of digital television, dynamic ad insertion, and the pivot to streaming video for premium content. Most recently, I led content operations for the Ventura TV streaming video platform, where we used AI and machine learning in everything from code development and testing to generating search results and personalized content recommendations, and also merging and harmonizing metadata and images from different sources into an aggregate content catalog for search and discovery. Um, in
You
terms
have a
of,
story from the trenches for yourself?
well, you know, television is a broad topic. I think the stories of most import are those that relate to the business side, contracts, regulatory, things that have real risk and impact. In the user experience space, um, there are cases where um, the inability to disambiguate between similar titles, let's say,
Mm.
and identify what the user is looking for without reading their mind is a challenge. And this is one of the things where sort of context and history is important, but also where you have to bring together data from myriad sources. So, for example, a user could search for the movie Titanic. Well, we would know sort of a priori that they're probably talking about the one with uh, Kate Winslet and
Yeah,
DiCaprio. But in fact, there's at least four major movies with that
at
name.
least. Yeah,
And there are a lot of adjacent ones that could be picked up if you're basically, as the user is searching, you're basically doing an autocomplete before they type out the entire title. So getting to the source of truth or the expectation there is a challenge. And that's where, in addition to uh, sort of simple search, an LLM with context about popularity and recency, and better yet, one that may have access to your own watch history and knowing that, for example, oh, you are a Leo DiCaprio fan, can get you to the right answer.
right.
Um, but ultimately, uh, in those use cases, a hallucination or error is not the end of the world compared to the business and legal sides of things, unless you mess up real bad on a kid's profile, for
Yeah.
example, which is one of the things that you have to be most cautious about.
Yeah, and if you do mess up on a kid's profile and you run into a COPPA enforcement action, it'll be $53,000 per violation. So that's I think it would be really neat, by the way, if the system knew that I'm actually a Downton Abbey fan, and so if I enter Titanic, it's more likely I want to see Julian Fellowes' Titanic than
Mhm.
James Cameron's Titanic. But Tyler Bell, it seems like the various search tools that Gracenote is responsible for might actually help in at least answering some of those questions. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us one of your pictures for stories from the trenches?
Sure, happy to do so. Thank you very much, Jason. So, Tyler Bell, I lead product at Gracenote for sports video and AI. And basically, what that means is creating AI products that our partners can consume to either continue or to enhance or finalize their own AI journey. So, everybody is looking to and investigating how the use of AI, LLMs in particular, can help their consumer experience, how it can assist in quantifying real material ROI. And it's a challenge for many organizations because the technology is new, the technology is novel, and the ROI is unproven. And so Gracenote is creating a suite of products, including small language models and MCP servers, that should make that easier. And indeed, that's my job to ensure they do make that easier. So that's what we're focusing on. That's what I'm focusing on. Some of the discussions talking about certainly the search side, I'm reminded that one of the critical processes that LLMs must rely on is something called entity resolution. And
Okay.
this is very different from search. So, entity resolution is essentially a data science terminology, which means that you're connecting two like or identical entities that don't share a common namespace or a common identifier. So you can imagine this as just sort of imagine it as two tables of movie titles and movie attributes that don't share an identifier. How do you match those together? And that's the process of entity resolution. And it's particularly important because when you ask an LLM a question, it will come back with a movie title, maybe a year, maybe some metadata attributes. They can't all be trusted, as Greg notes. But to use them properly, you really want to identify that to an unequivocal truth.
Right.
And that is the process of entity resolution. So that is the first tool and most primarily used tool across all of our MCP servers is the ability to understand that this collection of attributes actually refers to this specific entity. And that's very different from the search challenges that we're facing here, because generally search is promiscuous entity resolution as well. It's constrained. So when you search things, you want to give users the option to disambiguate. When you do entity resolution, you want to automate that disambiguation as much as possible. So they're related but separate challenges, and they solve two very different problems. Fundamentally, though, that those problems take us to the same point, which is how do we ensure that we get the correct content either proactively or reactively in front of the user so that they can get watching and get enjoying your platform and the content that you offer them.
Yeah, I've got actually an example there. So when someone is searching for something and it's a free form input box, right? Uh, as a platform, you don't necessarily know a priori if they're typing a title, uh,
Mm.
an actor's name, a franchise, a character, right? And you take something like James Bond. Well, we know as humans that when someone types James Bond, they're probably looking for the franchise.
Mhm.
Interestingly, the James Bond doesn't actually appear in the titles of the movies, right?
Right.
So it's a franchise. It's also a character, but there are also several SAG certified actors with that name,
Mm.
right? So the entities you have to disambiguate are, title, actor, character, franchise, potentially genres, all of these things. And so to do that in a way that predicts the entity the user had in mind or provides a response that allows them to disambiguate amongst those is important. Because the last thing you want to do is have someone type in James Bond and start seeing random movies that happen to have an actor named James
Yeah.
Bond in them. And that can easily happen without that kind of entity resolution.
I have one more, and then I have a question for Greg. But I was just thinking when you were talking about that, Ben, that Dracula, because I'm a horror movie guy. There's like 3,000 Dracula movies since we've been making movies, starting in the silent era. And one of my favorites is the 1969 Dracula made in Spain, starring Christopher Lee.
Hmm.
But in a lot of the source, the metadata, it's actually recorded as Count Dracula 1972 because it was released in the United States in 1972. And you're right. It seems unimportant. Like, is it right? Do I come across it? Like, it's not the end of the world. But if one of the providers that I have a platform, and one of the providers is giving it to me and it's listed as 1972, and another provider is giving it to me and it's listed as 1969. Whether or not I can reconcile those and prevent them as a search result that might come up correctly, depending on, in other words, if the user, for instance, enters 69 and it just goes and gives them 72 because it knows that that's the same movie. If I fail to do that, believe it or not, I could actually be running afoul of agreements that I've made with those distributors
Hmm.
to provide their content in the, along without denigrating it relative to the other content providers. In other words, I can be running up against my errors and omissions insurance. We could get sued,
Hmm.
and uh, there's it's just so funny how quickly in our world in distributing content, these silly mistakes can become very expensive very quickly. Anyway, Greg, I want to start us on a couple of threads, and Tyler had some thoughts on this as well, which is first a failure taxonomy, a way of understanding how we're going to talk about failures in AI. And we talked in the preparation about failure modes, hallucination, poisoning, uh, outdated data. So talk a little bit about the taxonomy. What are people talking about? What do they need to write down when they're thinking of failure? And which are the ones that enterprises uh, most underestimate?
Yeah, I think the categories go into a few. The first one, I think it's most noticeable is hallucination, confabulation is the most visible one that people are going to see. Second is outdated training data that the further we are from the training that the model has done,
Mm,
necessarily the more degradation in the information. It's like old encyclopedias on your bookshelf. It's over time, it's just going to degrade. Third is, I think, training data bias and skew. That if you have training data that's provided, especially one region of the world, let's say, predominantly, that's going to be the bias and the skew. If it's all males providing information, things like that, or certain industries or providers. Fourth is going to be the prompt sensitivity and context collapse.
mm,
That you can give the same sort of different parts of the day. You can do a legal brief in the morning and use the same AI, same case facts, and you're going to have an opposite framing of that in the afternoon, just based on where your context has gone during the day and what you've talked to it about. It's going to
mm,
pull out that information, saying, "Oh, okay, you're talking about liability now, so I'm going to give you things that you want to hear about liability."
mm.
And the last one is data poisoning and adversarial input, which is really cool to talk about. It's the least sort of problematic, probably would be the most damaging, but unintentional data poisoning is certainly there. But intentional one is great to talk about. I think it's the least important, but all those other ones are definitely there's lots of problems with the data, much like there's been with search with Google and the like. So there's
Mm.
an analogy there. Except for some reason with AI, we just tend to treat it as coming from the mount.
That's really, yeah. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but courts are dealing with lawyers every single day, trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that lawyers who are supposed to not trust anybody trust their AI. That because the thing is, it sounds so confident when it comes back and says, "Yeah, absolutely. This case was settled in California last year, and it held the following." And it just sounds so believable that the lawyer will then put that into a brief without checking it, and they're getting sanctioned left and right around the country
This
because
might be an opportune time to tell the audience, many of whom probably already know this, how an LLM works, right?
no,
LLM is not about identifying sort of the truth and picking it out.
mm,
It's uh, a basket of words and data and sort of vectors that identify likely probabilities that they go together,
yeah,
right? And so it kind of traverses a tree, trying to resolve to the most probable result, but that probability is never 100%.
right,
Uh, and Greg and Tyler may have a more eloquent way of explaining that than I do. But the end result is we're never really, I think, going to get rid of hallucinations. What we have to do is work on the verification step,
yeah.
which is what comes after you get a result.
A lot of the courts are now requiring lawyers basically to check this sounds so simple, but to check the work, saying if you are going to turn something in, because people rely so importantly, and because their lives depend on this, if you're going to turn something in, you personally attest, write down, sign your name, that you looked up everything that this brief cited, even if an LLM gave it to you to begin with, and you saw it with your eyes, that it says the thing that you said it did, which seems extreme, but to be honest with you, it's what we should have been doing all along. Um, Tyler, okay, so you talked about Grace Note as a ground truth layer for entertainment data. Can you explain to me what that means, why it's important in the context?
So there's a number of important points here. I will highlight the two, what I believe to be the two most important. So these are the two most important things that I articulate whenever we meet with anyone who's exploring or using AI within any kind of entertainment stack. Number one is that, as Ben and Greg have noted, LLMs are not data stores. They are not knowledge retrieval mechanisms. Because they store content as basically word associations as probability matrices, it means that when you ask them for specific content, such as give me the metadata for X, Y, or Z, it is not going into a database and pulling that content out. It is crafting an answer based on what is most likely. And therefore, as a result, you get extremely high hallucination rates across, and it varies by attribute, and it varies by the type of content. So, for example, season and episode numbers are extremely prone to hallucination. Movie titles, less so. Directors and primary actors are more so. And Grace Note's written a number of, I've done the research and we've written a number of papers on this that sort of quantifies when, how, and where LLMs are most susceptible to hallucinating in any kind of metadata or title or content retrieval context. So it's a well understood phenomenon, but we've qualified it and we've quantified it, but it's still not necessarily sort of well understood because the hallucinated content that is returned is so convincing on first blush. Generally, what you hear when people talk about LLMs and their ability to regurgitate or articulate facts is that they sound very impressive until you ask them about a subject in which you are an expert. And then
Mm.
you realize just where they're making things up. So that's number one. LLMs are not a knowledge store. Number two is, and this seems to be sort of very facile, but it's something that's worth repeating, in part because the marketing of frontier models tends to obfuscate it, is that there's a critical difference between the chatbot that you experience as a consumer. So when you use ChatGPT or the Gemini chatbot on Google or you use
Mhm.
Claude, this is a very different experience from the underlying model, which is GPT-5, or Google calls both their chatbot and their model Gemini, which doesn't help anyone. Or Claude is the chatbot and Sonnet is the model, Sonnet 4.6, and there's various other ones as well.
Eight
And
now, I think.
so
Yeah.
many folks still within our industry, quite understandably, don't acknowledge or don't really know the significance that there's such a difference between the model and the chatbot. And the main reason this is essential to understand is that the chatbot is a fully grounded experience. So it is an LLM that is tied to a significant amount of topical authoritative data, including sort of the web search, and some partners may use Gracenote and other data about people, places, and things, and financial data, flight information, anything that's real time or authoritative. The chatbot experience is grounded. It is tied to that information. The LLM can access that information before it answers you. When you access the model, when you license a model from OpenAI, when you license it from Anthropic or Google, they are not grounded models. It is a pure naked model that does not have access to that authoritative data.
Mm.
So for you to use that responsibly, the first thing you do after you license that model is you should ground that model in specific data. And that data relates to really whatever domain you're working with. Obviously, with Gracenote, it's entertainment, video, sports, music. But whenever you use an LLM, you want to ensure that you are not relying on its training data for knowledge. You want to
Mm.
rely on the LLM for its inference and its ability to understand, its ability to analyze. But for facts and information, you must rely on third-party data sources. That's called grounding, and
Okay.
that's essential to what we do. But really, anyone working with LLMs in any industry knows to ground their model.
Thank you very much. And before I move on to the next thread, which was about the cost of being wrong, um, grounding your model. So that means that, can you talk a little bit about, well, we're going to get into what you called SLMs, like small language models. But I'm fascinated by this notion of grounding your model, meaning I need to constantly, in other words, somehow I need to license both the model and the data, and to somebody else's point, to have it constantly be updating, so that it's not like I trained on this, and then I brought in the information, like on media, on movies, and then I haven't updated it since March when when I licensed a database, and so now we rely on RAG RAG frameworks in theory to go out and constantly be updating it. But an example that somebody brought up the other day, they had searched and said, are we at war with Iran? And chat, which we are, by the way. And ChatGPT said, no, that would be big news. And it was because it just simply had not caught up to the last like 3 or 4 weeks at the time where we were actually at
Yeah.
war. That's a terrible risk. That's huge.
Well, this
Um,
is, Greg touched upon this. It's the idea of knowledge locking, is that these models were built at least 6 months previously
right.
to you're using them now. It takes that much time to train them, evaluate them, etc., fine tune them. So all the information that's in these models is already dated.
Mhm.
And so if you are working in an industry that has temporally sensitive information, and for us, that includes release schedules, latest events, award ceremonies. But
Mhm.
for others, it could be stock and news information. You need a mechanism that gets this data into the model context. So the model context is, think of it as an LLM's working memory.
Mhm.
And if you put data in there, it means that it can use it. If you don't, it just relies on its training data. And that's where the problems start.
Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about the cost of being wrong, and then we'll get into some more practical do's. But first, with the don'ts, the cost of being wrong when you're dealing in your business with possible hallucinations and other results of AI misuse. And I'll throw to each of you, and then I'll have something to say about the cost in legal. But Greg, cybersecurity is your focus. So what can go wrong? We sometimes are talking about examples where the result is not that dangerous, but talk to me a little bit about what can go wrong.
Oh, in the cybersecurity realm, you can cut your own head off very easily. In fact, because the adversaries now are using AI, we have to, use AI to defend ourselves and defend the AI itself, two very
Mm,
different things. But certainly now, a trend, we're using this to help in security operations centers to make real-time decisions on, do we block this? Do we take action? Do we isolate this part of the network? That has got serious stakes. One, if you miss it, for false positives and false negatives, right? If you miss it, or if you get it wrong. So definitely, you can do incredible harm to your organization if you get it wrong, and that's why this your own risk, your own responsibility is very
mm,
important. So when we design these specialized systems to do this, you have to take into account the great points that Tyler brought up about what AI can do for you. And certainly for the more specialized models, it's a different, your risk is very imprinted on it versus a more general model where um, the context may be belonging to many people, the data may be belonging to many groups, you're unsure of the data. That's where your risk has to match that, and you recognize the consequences. The legal examples are the best ones because they're so public. I love those ones. It's so obvious what happens. But yeah, and I think that what the insidious part is the small errors can build. As you build up, as your own models can get self-poisoned as well. If you build in bad information to it, that can cascade. But certainly, I think, um, it's really individual responsibility. Risk has to match your use of AI, definitely.
mm. Uh, Tyler, you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen as the downside, the actual risk that companies run when you're misusing AI or misresponding to it.
Yes. So we see across the industry three very high level. These are very, very high level buckets of use cases. And I'll just describe each one and sort of where things go wrong. So the obvious one that we're all aware of is basically search. So LLMs are excellent at understanding unstructured, free-spoken text, either with voice. You can type in the craziest possible things and the LLM will figure out what you're saying. It'll say, "Oh yeah, that's season 3, episode 4 of this company." You're like, "Oh, all right, fantastic. How did you figure that out?" So, they're excellent in that regard. However, what happens is in search when you need to tie the model result into the actual actionable title within your catalog. That's where things fall over.
Mhm.
So we do see some implementations where LLM is primarily used as an entity recognition, an entity extraction mechanism. So the LLM extracts the titles from a response and then passes that to a traditional search engine, maybe with the year associated with it. And that's where things fall over. If you're relying on the metadata that is passed from the LLM training data into your own search engine, and this is sort of an augmentative use of LLMs. Very often you're going to get the wrong results out, or you're going to get something that's not within your catalog. So it tends to break down that translation between the metadata that an LLM returns from its training set and connecting that to your own catalog and your own search service. That is a brittle connection, and it can and will fail. The other place is recommendations. LLMs are fantastic if you give it a catalog, demographic data about a user, behavioral data, psychographic data, and you could say, hey, we want to recommend this kind of content to this user on this channel. And here's the kind of content that they've watched before, and this is where we'd like to nudge them to watch. LLMs are great at taking these complex rules and complex business rules and coming back with a series of titles which are topical and interesting for the consumer. When that is done incorrectly, it means that basically the consumer is just getting content that, and you see this on so many platforms,
Mhm.
it's heavily promoted, it's not personalized, it's not topical. And so you lose the user, you lose ROI potential and possibility because in our ideal world, certainly from a platform perspective, when I say our, I mean this is based upon my previous roles running and working with and developing CTV OSs. But in a preferred world, you would have the ideal content in front of the user, so they never need to search. You know what they want to watch before they watch it.
Right.
And so the more you can do that, the more you can obtain that, the better the experience. It gets them watching faster and there is less frustration. And the operating system, the UX, appears and it is genuinely more in harmony with the user's desires. So if you do that incorrectly with LLMs, that gets broken very quickly. Users get frustrated. And the last one, I'll just be brief, is really what we call data harmonization and engineering. Most people within our industry have at some point, day to day, as part of their business process, they need to harmonize catalogs on the back end. LLMs are extremely good at doing this as well. But if you do it incorrectly, if you rely on the training data too much, it means that you will overfold or underfold content. It means that the links that the user sees when they go to watch something are not the ones that they expect. The
Mm.
titles are not the ones that they expect. And you may get, say, a TV show which is mistaken for a movie of the same name,
Right.
or a reboot of Battlestar Galactica is overfolded with the original Battlestar Galactica. And so even LLMs, they've got great potential on the back end, sort of the back office processing, but that can go horribly wrong as well. And again, it always comes out to the consumer experience, the consumer frustration, and you're losing both an engaged customer and potential ROI.
Engage customers' potential ROI. I actually really, really like that because that is a huge cost if you're trying to differentiate yourself. Ben, in your experience in the product world, how are organizations blind to this problem? In other words, do you feel like organizations are correctly assessing the risk associated with with their AI responses being wrong,
Yeah.
front end or back end?
Um, Generally, the people in the trenches building it are, I think. I think there's a naivete at the higher levels
Mm.
that, AI is a panacea for lots of problems. Um, but when you talk about risk, there's one thing we haven't talked about, which may be of interest to our audience, and that is, and as you well know, Jason, there's lots of unresolved law and litigation here. The fact that LLMs have been trained on data that's not necessarily been licensed for that purpose. It's been
Oh yeah.
scraped from all sorts of sources. And the original content owners are not happy um, about this fact. And so an organization that is using an LLM for virtually any purpose um, uh, is potentially at risk of litigation based on the fact that they're using
Yeah.
data that was not appropriately sanctioned or licensed for its use. So I've been in organizations that had policy basically is the only LLM this organization may use is one that will indemnify us,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
most do not. So if you're looking to choose among uh, models and LLMs, one of the things I would encourage people to do is to make sure that you're properly indemnified, just so you've got that level of protection. Um,
That's wonderful advice. I don't, I that's really good legal advice. I like that a lot. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
no, so beyond that, the uh, you know, again, the risks, there's a spectrum of risk, right? Anytime the user experience is a poor one, you lose user trust. And and all the things that go along with that, which I think Tyler's really addressed. Um, the areas I think of most import are things that are regulatory in nature. So again, we've talked about COPA. That's the Child Online Privacy Protection
Hmm.
Act, um, where uh, it's first of all essential to not be gathering, you know, personally identifiable data from children to build
Right.
models with. So being able to sort of target kids and personalize the kids' experience is a bigger challenge. But it's something that's extremely important that you build safeguards around when you architect the system. Um, there is also other regulatory things that require appropriate disclosure and opt-in of the end user to using their data, storing their data. They have the right to examine what data you've collected from them and to ask that it be deleted. They have the right to not be tracked from an advertising perspective and to opt out from personalized advertising, to reset their ad ID that gets assigned and sort of gets passed down the pipeline while they're watching and ad decisions are being made. Um, so all of those things are important elements that have to be built in to the solution to mitigate that risk to the organization. And these risks again are not specifically that you make a bad recommendation, but that you run afoul of the law.
Right. Right.
Which is important. There's also some ramifications for things like accessibility, which is also federally mandated requirements that need to be accounted for as well.
You brought up indemnification, and so it's shocking to think that somebody could be using a service provider of any other kind of like you're going to be providing catering services, they're going to indemnify you for any of their actions that cause you to get sued. That is de minimis. That is basic need. It is shocking that somebody would not indemnify you. But here's something interesting. Even if they do indemnify you, if they don't have the money
Of
to
course,
actually pay off the lawsuit that's going to come, it's not worth the paper it's written on. And shockingly, Aon, which is a major insurance company, found in its recent research that basically only about I think it was only about 20% of people's data services or of enterprises' data services are actually insured. That essentially the across the industry, there's just this giant naked risk of their E&O insurance and whatever other insurance not covering
Mm.
issues involving the misuse of data. So the whole industry is basically self-insuring without even really being aware of it, and it's shocking. So if you're signing a contract, get the indemnification, like Ben says, and also require them to have insurance and require that insurance to have data services as part of the coverage, because you need a backstop and a backstop for the backstop, because
And
the
Jason,
risk,
if
yeah,
could I also offer what I think is a very important and topical point that we shouldn't leave unspoken,
yeah,
which is the fact that unless you engage, if you're using one of these what we call frontier models, right? The open AIs, the Anthropics, the Googles of the world.
yeah,
If you are engaging with them and they are your preferred LLM, uh, unless you have an enterprise agreement with them, they will be permitted to use the prompts that you input and
right,
any data, including grounding data that you input. They have permission to use this to further train their models subsequently.
right,
And so, if you work with an organization, or even if you're an individual, you always want to be extremely careful of what content that you are submitting to these LLMs, under what conditions and under what terms. And generally, Gracenote will not engage with any of our data products like our MCP servers with someone who has, say, just a developer license with one of these frontier models. They must have an enterprise license because Gracenote data is part of the input, either through
yeah.
RAG or through other prompt augmentation. And as a result, we don't want our data to be perpetuated in these models as some kind of training pool. So Gracenote is concerned about that, and certainly everyone in our audience, if it's not on their radar, they should be aware of that as well.
Yes, get an enterprise model. Most of the major providers provide that service. It'll cost you a little bit more, but not significantly a lot, and they won't be able to train on your data. Lightning round, because I know we're about to run out of time, and I have a feeling we could talk about this for hours because there's so many interesting like aspects and bunny trails that we could go after. But let's talk a little bit about what you want to leave people with, although the one Tyler just said is like huge. But short phrase, what people in our audience need to be thinking about and going out and taking care of right away. Greg, we'll start with you.
Yeah, you are responsible for your own AI. Your responsibility is your own. That it's not the model vendors, it's not some mysterious other organization or some larger internet deities that are going to take care of you. You have to do that yourself. And for that responsibility, like the model vendor sets the floor effectively of what's going to be provided for these services or accuracy or the like. You have to set your guardrails. Guardrails are not just the ones provided by the model vendors so that they can comply with, some government regulations or the like, that you can, set your own guardrails to protect yourself. Uh, and consider using more specialized uses of AI, like we see, in the legal, medical, other worlds. You can get quite specialized, and you can air gap yourself effectively from the larger general purpose models. And last is that the individuals yourself have to be responsible for doing that. This is a personal responsibility time with this new technology, like it's been for other ones. And you are responsible for your own conduct and the outcome of that. So that seems very sort of obvious in many ways, but it's not, judging by the actions out there today. It's like where we have all these ridiculous warning labels on things we use all the time, like on toasters, don't put this in the tub.
Right.
And this is our toaster in the tub sort of warning for AI that this is new technology, and like all new technologies before this, like we had with cloud, like we had with the first emergence of the internet. There are things you can do to protect yourself. So protect yourself, do the right things, and your data is important. And we certainly see it in the cyber world that nobody thinks their data is important, to your previous point, until it gets ransomed. And then there's a very distinct dollar value people place on it. Suddenly it becomes very objective about what that price tag is. So yeah, just you're responsible. You can take actions. So,
Tyler, thank you so much, Greg. Tyler, what would you like to leave people with?
Just very briefly, Jason, I would state that hallucinations are the rule, not the exception.
Mhm. Okay, very good.
Mm.
Thank you very much. And Ben, it's been a delight. What would you leave people with?
Well, so LLMs are designed to generate plausible results and not the guaranteed truth, right? And AI should not replace expertise. It should accelerate it.
Mm.
And think of AI as your fastest junior analyst,
Yeah,
not the decision maker, not the final editor.
yeah,
Uh, and the goal, I think, cannot rationally be to have zero hallucinations, but is to have systems in place and verification so that those are identified before they influence decisions or get manifested to users. So uh, to paraphrase a famous phrase, um, which was trust but verify, I'd say
mhm.
don't trust and verify.
Um, that's fantastic. My only advice, if you're practicing law, is work on your prompts. The better you can get at relying on your own awareness of this information, this area of expertise, the better your question will be to the AI, and the better the result that you'll get. And which means you'll wind up doing more work, but guided otherwise you're going to get an answer. You're right, it's like the smartest little sister that you've got, and she's extremely confident, but often wrong. And so you have to get real specific. I'm talking about Texas, I'm not talking about Florida. I'm talking about the last 10 years, not before. And please cite to this and not to that. The better your prompts get, the better your results get. So thank you so much. I have been just honored to get a chance to hear you guys talk. Greg Young, Tyler Bell, Ben Holland. My name is Jason Henderson, and this has been part of Digital Hollywood. So once again, thank you very much to Victor Harwood for bringing us together. And I hope to get to talk to you, all of you again, really soon. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Jason.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Thanks for